Welcome back to This is VANCOLOUR. Our featured guest tonight is the campaigns director at the Climate Emergency Unit, but you may recognize her as the woman who was, some would say, unfairly disqualified from running for the BC NDP leadership in 2022. She could have been our premier. She is Anjali Appadurai, and this conversation is supported by Shelter Point Single Malt Whiskey, distinctly Vancouver Island, uniquely Shelter Point. Hi, Anjali. So we've seen these huge protests, these huge pro-Palestinian protests around the world. Obviously, there are different groups that are converging and advocating for Palestinian rights. But really broadly, what do the pro-Palestinian protesters want? What are they advocating for?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. There is a very, very diverse and growing movement across the world, across Canada, and right here in this town. It's less of a clearly defined movement that has a specific goal. I would actually characterize it more as a reaction from people, and the reaction is just one of horror and outrage at what is happening.
And so the reaction is the reaction to Israel's response to the events of October 7th.
That's right. The current Israeli assault on Gaza. And I would say that the number one thing that people want, people from all walks of life want, is just to make the violence stop, to just end the atrocities and to end the killing of civilians. And so essentially a ceasefire now, a permanent ceasefire now.
Okay.
I think another piece of this that is, I think a reflection of people's sense of hopelessness and anger in watching this moment unfold so graphically across our social media, and it's just the images are everywhere, is just a demand to end Canadian complicity in it.
And so what do you mean by that, by Canadian complicity in what's going on in Gaza and Israel right now?
Well, our Canadian government has not only failed to condemn the atrocities, the killing of civilians, it's 12,000 children that have died at this point, but they're actively greenlighting it, and we're actually materially supporting it. We've approved, $29 million in military exports to Israel since October 7th. And that's actually an acceleration of our previous military support. And so there's this deep divide between what these large historic protests are calling for and what's actually being done. And I think that's fueling this movement even more, is just seeing that we do not want to be paying, into this government that is unaccountable, essentially.
So I guess the protest is international in a sense, because it is protesting the actions of the government of Israel, but also protesting our federal government as well.
Yeah, I think the reaction is very visceral. It's very raw. There's no, I don't think you could draw a calculated line from like, we are protesting to achieve this. I think people want the violence to stop, and we want an overall shift in the conditions that created this violence.
One of the issues I've seen around the protests is a fear that the protests are harboring or perhaps even amplifying anti-Semitism. And again, there's a diverse group of people that are involved. So sometimes those extreme voices, when they get found, they get painted onto the whole group. So one thing I want to ask you is, why don't we see these protests advocating for the release of the Israeli hostages that are currently being held by Hamas?
Mo, I really think it's a misnomer that these movements have not spoken out against the loss of Israeli life. I think that has happened. But the fact of the matter is that our governments have roundly and unequivocally condemned Hamas. We're not funding Hamas. We're funding Israel. We're not supporting Hamas. We're supporting Israel actively. And so the direction that our foreign policy is going is it's already there. And so there wouldn't be much point to a movement that is encouraging what is already there. I think what's really concerning is that there is no justification for the number of civilians, and especially children, that have died in Gaza since October 8th. And we're watching this unfold, and we see our government fail to condemn that. And so I think that there's a real one-sidedness to it. And also bringing up the accusations of anti-Semitism, to me, are concerning, because they actually erase the strong Jewish leadership of this movement. Since day one, we have seen Jewish folks across the country, thousands of them, and across North America, really mobilizing, leading this movement, organizing not just the mass demonstrations that we're seeing, but within communities as well. I think that's a real defining feature of this movement, is that it is the demonstrations on the streets, but it's also just an incredible array of neighborhood organizing, parents groups, cyclist groups, artists, cultural workers, teachers, faculty, universities. It's a really diverse array of people who are organizing and demonstrating in multiple different ways. And there's a deep criticism of Israel from our Jewish comrades. And that I think is really important to acknowledge and recognize.
Does the movement, though, have a responsibility to stamp out anti-Semitism within its ranks when it sees them openly in protests?
Absolutely. And, I fully acknowledge anti-Semitism is a hate crime, and it is real and well and alive in Canada. And we've seen a rise in it, and it is there. And I think we have to be very careful about naming it when it's there. That's what I've witnessed in these movement spaces, is being very careful to not blur those lines and to absolutely differentiate criticism of the state of Israel's actions from anti-Semitism. And I have witnessed that as a practice in this movement. The demands of the movement do not reflect anything anti-Semitic at all. It is purely a criticism of this ongoing even clearly signaled genocidal intent from the Israeli government, which is acknowledged around the world as a pretty extreme government, calling for extreme measures. And so that's very different.
I have a question. Why do protesters target provincial politicians or municipal politicians? Because again, you talked about Canada's complicity, which I appreciate in terms of understanding the protests, but why target Premier David Eby or Vancouver Mayor Ken Sim?
It's a great question. And I think, when I spoke about before this protest being so much bigger than demonstrations, it's really people speaking out within their communities, calling for a clear moral stance from all levels of government and from all the institutions in their lives. And, it's really important that we have, when you have a signal from, say, New West City Council or Burnaby, where they pass these ceasefire motions, that's a really important signal to send. I mean,
does it matter, though? I mean, it's New Westminster. No offense to New Westminster, but it's a little municipality.
I think one of the roots of this movement is identifying and calling out anti-Palestinian racism, which is deeply inherent. And, we've seen that be a sort of inherent bias in the media, in our foreign policy. We've seen that be expressed in very concerning sentiments from a provincial former minister, Senator Robertson. We've seen that from our local government leadership. And, I think it's really important for us to target that and to call that out and to root it out, because that's part of what is fueling the conditions for something terrible like this to happen in the first place. And, there are groups like that are specifically have a pro-Israel agenda, like CHEK, who are also talking to provincial and local government. And so then it becomes part of the broader conversation about rooting out anti-Palestinian racism and separating that from criticism of Israel.
Absolutely. Anjali, I know this can be a very difficult conversation, so I appreciate your courage for coming onto the show and talking with me tonight.
Thanks for asking the questions.
Absolutely. Folks, she is a powerful voice in our province. She is Anjali Appadurai. Big thank you to Shelter Point Single Malt Whiskey for supporting local conversations, including the topics that no one else wants to touch. Now, up next, I forgot to mention that tonight is This Is VANCOLOUR's 100th episode, and apparently Sonic Radio's Angela Valiant has a surprise for me. That's up next.